There comes a moment in life, not marked by fanfare or drama, but by a quiet knowing, when you realize something has to change. You're exhausted, not from doing too much, but from giving too much to what doesn't nourish your soul. You answer every call, you show up for everyone, you stretch yourself thin, hoping to be enough. But what if being constantly available is the very reason you're feeling invisible? Let me tell you this truth. When you stop being available to everything and everyone, everything begins to change. Not because the world changes, but because you finally begin to see it clearly. Every time you say yes when something deep inside you trembles with resistance, you step away from your own truth. That small inner voice, the one you've learned to ignore for the sake of being liked, needed, or seen as dependable, isn't trying to be difficult. It's trying to protect you. It's the part of you that still remembers who you are beneath the noise of obligation and the need for approval. We have been taught, often unconsciously, that self-worth is tied to usefulness, that the more available we are, emotionally, physically, mentally, the more valuable we become. So we stretch ourselves to be everywhere at once, answer every call, reply to every message, attend every gathering, fulfill every favor asked of us. And yet slowly something inside begins to wither. We smile, we show up, but we do not feel present. We are there, but we are not whole. Take the example of a woman who thought she was doing everything right. A mother, a friend, a co-worker, always reachable, always ready to help. Her phone never left her hand, even during the quiet moments of tucking her child into bed. She believed this made her dependable, responsible, strong. But one night, her daughter looked up and said softly, "Mummy, your phone listens better than you do." That sentence sliced through years of habit. It wasn't that she didn't love her child. It's that she was giving so much of herself away to the world, she had nothing left to give to the moments that truly mattered. This is the tragic illusion of constant availability. It feels like generosity, but often it is self-erasure. And what is lost is not just time or energy, but self-respect. The belief that our needs, our rest, our quiet, are as sacred as anyone else's demands. This is not kindness, this is not nobility, this is self-betrayal. You begin to notice the weight of it when resentment creeps in, when you say yes but feel anger inside, when you give your time but feel hollow after. These are not signals to push harder, they are your soul calling you back. Every yes born from guilt chips away at your authenticity, and when authenticity goes, relationships become transactions. People begin to expect you to show up, not because they value you, but because they've grown used to consuming you. And people will consume you if you let them, not always out of cruelty, but out of habit. When you teach others that your time is always theirs, they rarely stop to ask what it costs you. Your silence teaches them your limits, or your lack of silence teaches them there are none. In either case, the lesson is clear. Boundaries are not luxuries for the selfish, they are necessities for the self-aware. But boundaries are so often misunderstood. People think they are rigid, cold, or heartless, that to say no is to reject love or duty. But boundaries are not barriers to connection, they are invitations to respect. They are not walls to shut people out, they are thresholds to show people how to enter your life with care. Saying no doesn't mean you don't care. It means you care enough about yourself to recognize your limits. It means you care about others enough not to give them a broken, half-present version of you. It is not a declaration of selfishness. It is the foundation of sanity. When you begin to honor your own rhythm, something incredible happens. The world begins to reorient around your truth. You stop overextending. You stop explaining. You begin to breathe again. The right people will understand. The right people will stay, and the ones who only knew how to take they will fall away. Let them. What you lose in quantity, you gain in quality. What you shed in noise, you reclaim in peace. You were not meant to be a vessel others empty, you were meant to overflow, but first you must stop leaking your energy into every hand that asks. You must learn to hold yourself sacred. That is the beginning of healing. That is where everything begins to change. Stop replying. Stop showing up where your presence is taken for granted. You will learn more in 1 month of silence than in years of noise. It is not the external world that becomes clearer, it is your own soul that begins to speak in the absence of distraction. We often mistake noise for connection and attention for affection. We believe that if people surround us, engage with us, even argue with us, that it must mean we are seen, but the truth is far more subtle and far more painful. There is a quiet revolution that happens within when you choose to pull away, not in bitterness, not in anger, but in sacred observation. You stop replying, and the silence you receive in return becomes your answer. You stop being the one who always initiates, always checks in, always makes space, and suddenly you notice the landscape of your relationships transform. Not because people have changed, but because you are no longer holding up the illusion. There was once a man who lived for connection. He was always the one to plan the meetups, to check in when someone was sick, to send thoughtful messages on birthdays and difficult days. He was the glue. But the more he gave, the more invisible he felt. He was surrounded, but unseen, loved, but only when convenient. So one day he stopped. No anger, no announcements, just a quiet decision to step back. 1 week passed, then 2. No calls, no messages, no questions. Not a single person wondered where he had gone. It broke him, but it also freed him. That silence wasn't empty. It was filled with truth, the kind of truth that cannot be spoken aloud because it pierces too deeply. He had not lost friends, he had lost the illusion that those friends were ever truly there. And in that painful clarity something remarkable happened. He began to see his own reflection, unshaped by the needs and projections of others. He began to remember what it felt like to be whole on his own. There is a term for this process, the art of holding your space without becoming absorbed by the emotional currents of others. To step back without guilt, to feel the pull of old patterns and still choose differently. This is not withdrawal as escape, it is withdrawal as revelation. It is the sacred act of choosing your inner truth over outer approval. We live in a world that rewards constant availability. To withdraw is to become suspicious. To be silent is to be called distant. But in truth there is no act more courageous than to sit quietly with yourself and wait to see who notices your absence, not out of pride, but out of a deep need for truth. When you withdraw, you do not lose people, you lose illusions. The illusion that you are needed everywhere. The illusion that your constant presence keeps relationships alive. The illusion that love must be earned through self-abandonment. What falls away is not love. It is dependency disguised as connection. And what remains is real, even if it is small. This process is not easy. It will feel lonely. It will feel like you're walking away from everything familiar. And in a sense, you are. You are walking away from the version of yourself that needed to be needed, that feared being forgotten, that tied self-worth to being available. But as the days pass, something in you will begin to soften. You will hear your own thoughts more clearly. You will feel your own emotions without having to edit them for someone else's comfort. You will notice who reaches for you not because you're useful, but because they see you. And perhaps most importantly, you will begin to recognize that your worth was never meant to be measured by how often your phone lights up or how many people ask where you are. Your worth is in your being, in your depth, in your silence. Let them wonder. Let them drift away. Let the silence be the great revealer, not as punishment, but as prophecy, because when you are no longer performing availability, you are finally available to yourself, and in that presence, everything changes. There is a quiet and often misunderstood power in becoming less available, not out of ego or detachment, but from a deeper understanding of your own value. You begin to recognize that your time, your energy, your presence, these are not limitless resources to be spent on every request, every demand, every cry for attention. They are sacred offerings that must be given with care, not out of habit. Scarcity, by its nature, creates value. This truth applies not just to material things, but to people, to moments, and to presence itself. When someone is always available, always reachable, always willing to drop everything for others, it often becomes easy to overlook them. Familiarity, after all, breeds not just comfort, but invisibility. We assume what is always present will always be there, so we stop seeing it, we stop appreciating it. The constant giver becomes background noise, useful, dependable, but not extraordinary. And slowly, almost without noticing, they begin to vanish in the eyes of those they serve. But the person who chooses to guard their energy, who learns to say no without apology, who is not accessible to every whim, that person is remembered. Their presence becomes intentional and therefore powerful. When they speak, people listen. When they act, it matters. Not because they are better than anyone else, but because they have chosen to be deliberate, and in that deliberation their worth is felt more deeply. There's a subtle transformation that occurs when you stop solving everyone else's problems. You stop being the emotional crutch, the go-to fixer, the one who absorbs chaos that was never yours to hold. And in that space, others are forced to grow. You become not the hand that lifts, but the compass that points. People begin to find their own legs when they can no longer lean on yours. This is not cruelty, it is empowerment. It is the quiet act of believing that others too are capable. Many don't realize how much of their exhaustion is tied not to physical activity, but to emotional overexposure. They are drained not because they are doing too much, but because they are constantly giving pieces of themselves to people who take without noticing the cost. Protecting your energy is not selfish, it is wise. It is a sign that you are no longer trying to prove your worth through endless availability. In a corporate study on productivity, researchers found something revealing. Employees who declined unnecessary meetings and enforced clear personal boundaries were rated as more respected and more effective, not just because they accomplished more, but because their refusal to be constantly interrupted signaled that their time was valuable. And because they treated their own time as precious, others began to treat it that way too. They taught the world how to interact with them, not through words, but through actions. This same principle applies to every area of life. When you no longer answer every late-night message, when you don't immediately react to every crisis, when you give yourself permission to wait, to pause, to reflect, people notice. They begin to approach you differently, with more care, with more intention, because they know your attention is not handed out freely, it is earned. But this shift must begin within. You must first believe that your presence has weight, that your voice carries depth, that your time is worthy of protection. Many struggle here. They are afraid that by stepping back they will be forgotten, that by saying no they will no longer be needed. But being needed is not the same as being loved, and if your worth is built on being available to everyone, it is a fragile kind of worth, one that will break the moment you try to rest. You do not need to prove yourself by being constantly present. In fact, your greatest impact often comes when you are least accessible, because then, when you do show up, when you do speak, when you do give, it is felt, it is remembered, it is valued. In a world obsessed with urgency and constant connection, the person who chooses intention over impulse becomes rare. And in that rarity, there is beauty. There is strength. There is a quiet revolution in being a person who does not give their energy lightly, who knows their own worth so deeply that they do not need to chase validation in busyness. So let your availability be earned. Let your presence be a gift, not a habit. You are not here to be everything to everyone. You are here to be whole, to be true, to be deeply aligned with your purpose. And when you honor that, everything changes. There is a hidden wisdom in silence that the modern world has forgotten. We live in an age of constant stimulation, screens blinking with notifications, voices asking for our time, responsibilities chasing us from the moment we wake. We are surrounded by noise, not just from the outside world, but from the inside as well. Expectations, anxieties, the pressure to respond, to please, to be seen. In this constant motion, the deepest part of us, the intuitive, knowing part, becomes faint, barely audible beneath the din. And yet it is precisely that voice which holds the key to who we truly are. Stepping back is not simply a strategy to gain space from others. It is not a withdrawal in the sense of escape. Rather, it is a sacred returning to yourself. Because when you are endlessly available to everyone else, you become unavailable to the one relationship that determines the quality of all others, the relationship you hold with your inner life. You begin to mistake external validation for internal truth. You begin to live outwardly, smiling, responding, performing, while inwardly you are exhausted, scattered and numb. But silence is a gateway. There is a profound clarity that arises only when you unplug from the chaos, not just technologically but emotionally. When you remove yourself from roles and expectations long enough to hear your own thoughts without judgment, without interruption. Solitude in this light is not isolation, it is communion. It is the deep recognition that within you lives a wisdom older than any advice, deeper than any opinion. And that voice does not shout. It waits, patiently, until you are quiet enough to listen. There was a woman, an artist, who felt herself breaking under the weight of everything. She didn't know what was wrong. She was surrounded by people, had steady work, friends, even success by many standards. And yet every morning she woke up with a heaviness she couldn't name. So she did something radical. She disappeared, not out of despair, but out of necessity. 30 days in a cabin. No phone, no emails, just blank canvases, her paints, and the sound of her own breath. She wasn't running away. She was returning to herself. The first few days were unbearable. The stillness screamed. Her hands twitched for her phone. Her mind raced with old conversations, forgotten to-do lists, imagined judgments from others. But then the fog began to lift. She started painting, not to impress, not to post, but to feel. Images came through that she didn't plan. Emotions rose that she had buried under years of busyness. By the end of the 30 days, she hadn't just created new work, she had reclaimed herself. And she understood deeply that much of her anxiety wasn't from what she lacked, but from what she was over-consuming. She wasn't tired because of life's demands. She was tired because she had lost her center. This is not her story alone. It is the story of so many who have forgotten that to see clearly, one must first step away from the fog. And the fog isn't always dramatic or destructive. Sometimes it looks like success. Sometimes it looks like being loved by many. But if you are not rooted in yourself, none of it feels real. You begin to perform life rather than live it. You become reactive rather than reflective. You move from moment to moment without presence, without meaning. Clarity does not arrive in chaos. It waits in the quiet, in the pauses, in the breath between doing and being. When you give yourself the gift of space, true space, undiluted by distraction, you begin to see where you've been lying to yourself, where you've made yourself small, where you've accepted roles that were never yours to carry. You see the shape of your life not as others expect it to be, but as it longs to become. This is why emotional space is not a luxury, it is essential. It is not an act of detachment, but of devotion. Because you cannot be fully present for others if you are absent from yourself. You cannot give love that is whole if you yourself are fragmented. And no external relationship can ever replace the guidance that arises from being intimately attuned to your own soul. To create emotional space is to trust that in the absence of noise, something wiser will rise. It is to believe that your truth is not found through consensus, but through inner dialogue. And in that sacred dialogue, you will not find perfection, but you will find alignment. You will find direction. You will find yourself. And once you have seen yourself clearly, the world can no longer pull you in directions that do not belong to you, because now you walk with your own compass, and that changes everything. When you stop being constantly available, when you begin to pull your energy back and stand more fully in your own space, something inevitable and revealing occurs. The people who were clinging to your presence only for their own convenience begin to fall away. Their absence may sting at first, like the quiet after a loud crowd disperses, but in that stillness a deeper truth begins to emerge. You realize that what you've lost wasn't genuine connection. It was dependency. It was proximity mistaken for loyalty. What remains is not lesser, it is purer. What remains is what was meant to stay when you were no longer giving everything away. The mistake so many make is believing that love is proven through constant accessibility, that the more we are available, the more we are valued, that the ones who truly care will only keep caring if we continue to answer every call, respond to every message, show up to every crisis. But this is not love, it is performance. And performances are exhausting. They may earn applause, but they never fill the soul. Because deep down we know when we are being loved for who we are, and when we are merely being used for what we provide. Love does not demand uninterrupted access. It respects the dignity of space. It understands that sometimes the most loving thing a person can do is to retreat, to breathe, to tend to their own spirit. And the people who are rooted in love, real love, will not interpret that space as rejection. They will not take your silence as an offense, nor your absence as abandonment. They will see it as it is, a return to self, a necessary realignment of energy, a sacred boundary born not out of anger, but out of necessity. There was once a man who had spent years being the center of his circle. He was the one who answered late-night calls, lent money he couldn't spare, hosted gatherings, soothed arguments, held everyone's secrets. He did this because he thought it made him important, indispensable, loved. But over time, the weight grew unbearable. He realized he didn't know who he was when he wasn't being needed. So one day he stopped, not out of spite, but out of fatigue. He stopped initiating, stopped giving on autopilot, stopped being available to everyone all the time. And what happened? Some people vanished. They stopped calling, stopped reaching out. There were no messages asking, "Are you okay?" There were no conversations about the change, just silence. And at first, he mistook that silence as proof that he was no longer loved. But over time he saw it clearly. The ones who disappeared were never really with him. They were only ever with what he gave them. But a few remained. A few called not because they needed something, but because they noticed the stillness and cared to understand it. Those people became his true circle. Not many, but enough. This is what happens when you reclaim your space. The unnecessary falls away. The performative fades. And what is left is a quieter, deeper form of connection, one built not on expectation, but on mutual respect. One that says, I honor your silence as much as your words. I trust your presence, even when it comes and goes. You see, the right people will never make you feel guilty for choosing yourself. They won't weaponize your boundaries or punish your stillness. They will not need you to constantly prove your love through sacrifice, because they know that true relationships are not based on how often someone is available, but on how honest, whole, and present they are when they do show up. They don't ask you to be endless. They ask you to be you. And here is the paradox: when you stop trying to be everything to everyone, when you stop performing availability as a way to feel worthy, you become more authentically yourself. And that self, rooted, clear, and aligned, is what attracts relationships that are real. Not because you've chased them, but because you've become magnetic to truth. In this world of endless connection, of constant pings and demands, it is easy to forget that we are not machines. We are not here to be always on. We are not Wi-Fi signals to be tapped into at will. We are living beings with rhythms, dreams, seasons, and limits. And when we honor those limits, we become more alive, not less. When the wrong people leave, it is not a tragedy. It is a healing. And when the right ones stay, not only do they respect your space, they help you protect it. In that kind of connection, you don't lose yourself. You come home. So today, I invite you to do something radical. Turn off the notifications, leave some messages unanswered, decline invitations that exhaust you. Let go of the guilt. Choose peace over pleasing. Because the moment you stop being available to what drains you, you become available to what builds you. And in that space, everything changes.